Jesus himself never spoke about people being sinners. It was not a thing. It came later in order to then abide to the rules that Christianity, as it was forming itself as a church, was putting out. So now we need a rule book. Let's throw together a Bible. Let's bring this, let's bring that, and have it something that can control this group that we are forming, the group of the church at that time. Might not seem to be the most logical combination for all of you. Some of us have an idea of Tantra as being this path of freeing ourselves from any type of limitation, any type of inhibition. So how does an idea of virtue that sort of always implies an idea of morality, how does it actually fit together with Tantra? Now, you could say that Tantra is the, well, we call it even sometimes within the school, the science of life. It is a path that is not trying to complicate things, but to simplify things to their natural essence. Also not to vulgarize, but to understand that most of our troubles as individuals and as a society arise from us making things very complicated. In the continuous chatter of our mind that loops off into all sorts of stories and opinions and oppositions and so forth. This is where we tend to get lost, and Tantra is aiming to give a ticket out of that. Not so much by adding so many elements to your being, but by removing those things that keep you from seeing who you truly are. Removing the agitations, removing the imbalances, removing the limitations in order for you to become aware of who you are just right then and there. Tantra is an extremely practical system that aims to allow the practitioner, not just allow, but actually invite the practitioner to utilize everything that you might want to do within your life, everything that is part of your direct surroundings, of the outer world, of the inner world. Utilize all of that to grow, to transform, to rise above yourself again and again and again until you achieve liberation, complete freedom. Therefore, Tantra starts where we are. And we are currently part, at least I guess, well, I would guess all of you are currently part of at least a westernized society. You were educated, most of you, in the Judeo-Christian mindset within the Western cultures. All of you carry, in one way or another, this very particular way of how we see things as a people, as a human race currently on this planet. And as we aim to start where we're at in Tantra, let's say the starting point of looking at morality and looking at virtue is how is it sort of defined in the day-to-day experience of the average person. And basically, you could say that one way or another, all to different degrees, but we all sort of share this wish to strike a balance between living a good life and being a good person. And interestingly, to a certain degree, there's definitely residues of this in the West being of sorts a contradiction. Living a good life, enjoying your life, expressing yourself might somehow feel at times contradictory to being a good person. And within this society that we live in, where we sort of, on one hand, very much celebrate, in a not very conscious way, the individuality, and we insist very much on the individuality, and see the single person not as systemic as it used to be. If you think of a prince 500 years ago, he wouldn't have, as a 10-year-old, a room to himself, like we like to depict it today in Disney movies, that the princess has a room to herself, which is plastered with the posters of the current boy band of the time, playing the lute or whatever, and having their medieval comics flying around and so forth, because the values in that time were very, very different. So a prince or a princess 500 years ago in the Western culture would be continuously surrounded with people, wouldn't have a space to themselves, an individualized space that expresses their likes and dislikes and their wishes and things. But it would be a life of being harshly integrated into the destiny you were born in. So you were, from moment one of your life, raised to be royal, raised to be a king or a queen later on, raised to represent your country, and so on and so forth. And there, it was not like, oh, you know, my dear, what do you want to do when you grow up? That was not a question. You will be a member of the royal family one way or another, and it's predestined, and you have to follow this. And if you don't, you get excommunicated. You leave your group, you leave your family, and this was one of the worst punishments ever. Nowadays, if somebody would tell you, let's say you committed a crime, and then the judge tells you, you don't have to go to prison, which is the worst thing to think about nowadays, that our individual freedom is limited into a cell that is not individualized and so forth, and that we can't go wherever we want to. But in those days, that wouldn't have been as bad as being excommunicated. If nowadays the judge would tell you, well, you know, you got to leave the country and never come back. And you don't have to stay in prison, especially if you were committing a huge crime. That is actually a relief. You would actually try to do that by yourself, to flee, to get away. So the culture that we live in strongly determines how we see things, how we value things. It strongly determines the subconscious ways in which we tend to act, all of us, in one way or another. Last week we spoke a lot about guilt and grudge and forgiveness, and this aspect of guilt, which is inbuilt in this idea of, well, I will, you know, either live my individualized good life with the likes and dislikes of my ego central to it, or I will be that which Western culture considers a good person, abiding to the rules of society and of the law, and in that way being what we call in that context virtuous. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, and like that you'll be notified with the things that we are sharing. How is that whole structure held together? By making us feel guilty. Already as a little child, we learn if you behave in a certain way, mommy and daddy will be upset. And if then you show remorse, you feel guilty for what you did and so forth, this is usually rewarded as something wonderful, because it will make you more likely to apply to the rules that your environment puts up on you. It will make you more sociable. Your parents will be very happy for you to show this sort of behavior. And this entire cultural background, we carry within us a little bit, if you want to put it very extreme, giving us a continuous feeling of somehow maybe being a sinner, which is very much engraved into Christianity and the Christian belief system from about 200 years after Christ. Jesus himself never spoke about people being sinners. It was not a thing. It came later in order to then abide to the rules that Christianity, as it was forming itself as a church, was putting out. So now we need a rule book. Let's throw together a Bible. Let's bring this, let's bring that. And have it something that can sort of, to a certain degree, control this group that we are forming, the group of the church at that time. Most authentic spiritual systems, including the origins of Christianity around Christ, around Jesus, and many, many other systems, actually agree very much on how virtue works. And it is not so much this opposing thinking of good and bad that comes with this application of guilt within our culture. Okay, you're either a sinner, you're doing bad stuff, or you are virtuous, and then you're doing good stuff. And this is the big opposition, and you have to pick a side and then try to stay on that side as much as you can. Even in the way that vice and virtue are presented within the Christian context as the 7 deadly sins, and then on the other side, the 7 great heavenly virtues. They are shown in this coupled up way. So, for example, you have chastity as a great virtue, which is opposed to lust as a great sin. You have temperance as a virtue, which is opposed to gluttony as a sin. You have kindness as a virtue, and envy as a sin. So there is sort of this presentation of vice and virtue as somehow a polar system, an opposing system in which you pick a side. Now, when we come into this world and we sort of learn it's wonderful to be a good person, and, you know, even just by reasonable thinking or even intuitive feeling, you could argue, we come to the conclusion that, well, if I am a good person and I do good actions, probably I'll have good results in life. I'll probably live a good life. We are generally interested in doing that. Buddhism talks about this very clearly in this concept of karma. You do good things, you'll reap a good life. It's a very simple thing. If you have, good vibrations, good thoughts, good emotions inside of you, you will result into goodness. But then when it is presented in this way of opposing forces, where you sort of have to continuously struggle to remain on one side of the magnet and the other magnet is just pulling you continuously over, it all of a sudden becomes a struggle to be virtuous. It becomes a thing. It becomes something that you need to put willpower in, and then you feel guilty for not having enough willpower to act in certain ways that you wish to. And then you know, okay, if I'm not acting in this virtuous way, that means I'm acting in the vicious way, and then I'm already falling to the other side. If I'm on that side, it means clearly I cannot be on that side. It becomes all very messy and complicated, and it creates, next to the guilt that we already talked about, a ton of inner conflict. When inner conflict arises, tension arises. When tension arises, fear arises. When fear arises, we start to do all sorts of unspeakably awful things. So this, let's say, concept as we have it as a culture, which is also hasn't been questioned for a long time. We are not having a whole lot of discussion around this as a larger group. Of course, there are groups of philosophers and so forth that might be thinking about these sort of things, but it is not something that is, educated in a very clear way. We are educated to follow the law. We are educated to do as mommy says. We are educated to a certain degree to be reasonable, to a certain degree. But we are not educated, for example, to be emotionally intelligent. We are not educated to listen to our intuition. We are not educated to be balanced. We are educated to fit into the system as it is right now, which has a lot of limits to it, as any system has. Hey guys, if you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more content on spirituality, Tantra, and more.
And if you want to sign up for our online classes or for our retreats, you can see our website on the description below.